leveraging influence to become an effective leader. I actually think this is content that a lot of you are really going to embrace and see some opportunity to grow in your own field and doing what you're doing. To tell you a little bit about who we are, Bill, it's not advancing the slide, so if you could advance it for us.
Sure.
Okay. My name is Paul Kirch, and I own a company called Active Sales Intelligence. I started this company about 5 years ago with the sole purpose of helping provide better sales support and service to the marketing research industry. Since that time, I've expanded beyond the research industry, but it's still a big area of my focus is marketing research. I also host a radio show called Boss Academy Radio, and this the sole purpose of that show is to reach out to entrepreneurs, business owners, and provide them better strategies, business ownership success strategies to be specific. Bill McCormick, who is my co-host on this, is the CEO of Sales Training and Results Incorporated. Prior to starting STAR, he worked for 10 years in sales and sales management and marketing for a Fortune 25 corporation, after which he joined an international consulting firm as Vice President of Marketing for about 5 years. Bill is an excellent sales trainer. He's a strategist, sales management workshop leader. He's created some incredible content. I discovered Bill because someone very close to me had gone through one of his negotiation courses and raved about the content, said, you've got to meet this guy. I think there's some synergy there. And I am always looking for ways to grow myself. So I got to know Bill, and I said, okay, I want to learn more about what you're doing. And I saw some of his material, and I thought there's some real synergy between his strategies and philosophies and mine. But also I thought I could really learn something and grow my own offering. And I actually attended a couple of his workshops and have sat in on training and for one of his influence courses, which we're going to be talking about today. And what I saw was instantly a light bulb went off. I said, I've got to bring this to the research industry. But I've also got to bring it to my other clients, and I've also got to bring it to entrepreneurs. So, Bill, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being a part of this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for. I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak to everybody today, and I'm thrilled to be working with you.
Absolutely. So, why is this course so impactful? Because I see so many ways that this helps professionals grow. I wear a lot of hats. I have a CEO title. I'm a salesperson. I host a radio show. I work with entrepreneurs. I am an entrepreneur. And so in my own life, I'm always constantly trying to be better, trying to find ways to engage people more effectively, find ways to have people respond to me more effectively. I mean, obviously in sales, we want to do a better job of getting people to respond to us and interact. And, we often see people who are very charismatic, and we think they're larger than life. You see somebody walk into a room where people kind of flock around them. They want to get to know them. I had an uncle that was that way, and I was always in awe of how people responded to him. He was always very charismatic. And, he was approachable, likable. What I learned is these are traits that can be taught. People can grow in what they're doing, and one of the ways to do that is through learning to be better at influence. You think about successful CEOs and politicians. What do they know that the rest of us don't know? And a lot of times it's exactly that. They know how to drive influence. They know how to get people to do and respond to their requests. They know how to get people to follow their lead. And it's not just because they're up on a pedestal. It's because they are able to actually find ways to connect with people. So when I learned a little bit more about the influence course, it made me realize that I need to bring this to people that I can help, and it was also something I knew could help me grow. So when I talked to Bill about doing this webinar, I won't say he was resistant, but it was not exactly his model. In the past, he's done this in a full-on 2-day workshop, which is very immersive, and it's quite intensive. And so the idea of breaking this down into a 1-hour webinar, it doesn't necessarily translate. But I said, okay, Bill, there's got to be a way we can do that. And so what we've come up with today I think, is content that is going to really help you grow and transform your life, and there's some great takeaways. Now, beyond this webinar, we are going to have some opportunities for you to go further, but that's not what this is about. This is an opportunity for you to walk away with some great strategies for your own life in ways to just be more influential and to create leverage in your own life. So the question is this for me? I'd say that arguably, I said I wear a lot of hats. It's definitely for me, and I think it's for every one of you that's on this call. Every one of you wants to grow. You wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in growing professionally. So entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders, sales executives, every one of us can learn to be more influential. And even if you already are an influential person, you've got a following, great. There's always ways to learn to be more effective. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Bill, I'm going to let you kind of walk them through the definition and take us through a little bit about the influence.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Let me give a collective thanks to everybody in the audience. We appreciate a lot you're making the time available today, and for almost all of our remaining time, Paul and I are going to be sharing the presentation. Our intention is to make this as educational, as informative as possible, so you do take away some practical tips and techniques that you can all use to become more influential. Just to quickly build on what Paul said, our company, Sales Training and Results, when we founded the company, Influence was our first course, and we actually targeted salespeople as the initial audience, because I know we have a wide range of people in the audience today. Some of you are in sales, some in business development, a lot of you are in other functions. But my reason for saying that is the first group we work with, and we still do, are sales professionals, because you have to use influence skills all the time if you're in sales. But what we quickly learned, and this is the main point I want to make, is we quickly learned from all of our clients that everybody needs influence skills. So when Paul was talking about entrepreneurs and owners and managers and leaders, whatever your job title is, we're going to try to give a range of examples today. Now, what I'd like to do with this slide is as much as possible, I'd like to simulate how we teach the course. And when we do teach our workshop, we always begin with, we always like to ask the folks in the audience, how would you define influence? Now, I promise in a moment I'll show how we would define it, but I'd like you to just think about that for a second, because in a few seconds I'm gonna show on the screen a polling question so you can get a chance to maybe pick the definition that comes closest to what you would select. But let me just mention one other quick thing before we go to the polling question. In addition to the content that Paul and I are going to be presenting today, we also want to try to do our best to make sure that we answer your questions. So at approximately the halfway point in the presentation, we're going to pause. We're going to open up the questions and answers where you'll have a chance to type us some questions. We're also going to do that at the end of the session. So we're going to try to strike a balance between both presenting information to all of you and also doing our best collectively, both Paul and I, to answer your questions. So if you just think about how would you define influence? We get lots of answers in the workshop to this, and what I'd like to show you here, this should go on your screen. There you go. You should be seeing a poll on the screen. What I'd like you to do is take a few seconds to read the choices and literally vote. I'll pause and give you a chance to do that. I think we've almost got everybody. Just give it another few seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. Okay, let me share the results. Give me a second here. Now, we don't believe in trick questions. But because we have so many of you in the audience and we can't interact with you one-on-one, if we were doing this as a live in-person workshop, I would actually verbally hear your answers. But choice number choice number 4, if I have to lie to a colleague to influence somebody, that is not what our course is all about. Basically, we look at influence. If I was going to use a phrase, and this will be true for today's session as well as uh, the longer workshop that Paul will talk about at the end of today, we look at influence as positive influence. The word we hear a lot when we ask participants for their definition is some of the words you see in the other choices. Influence is persuasion. How can I persuade either another person or a group? Influence, in a best case, is generating buy-in. I mean, I'm going to actually talk about that in another minute. In some cases, influence is aligning either an individual or a team to work towards a common goal. But every now and then, we do get people who come to the class, and I'll be glad to address this more when we open this to questions later. We believe in positive influence, but there are some people that when they hear the word influence, they actually think about words like manipulation or lying or deceit. And although I'm not going to disagree, you can influence somebody if you do that. But my question for your consideration would be, what's the long-term effect? And we look at influence as doing what you need to do, whether it's persuasion or buy-in or alignment, to get a certain result, but to conduct yourself in a way that it's actually a positive outcome. So now let me go a little bit further and build on this. So if I was going to go a little deeper on then our approach to influence, it's what you see on that quote on the middle of the page. You really, in a long-term positive way, and if you're an owner or you're an entrepreneur or you're a salesperson and you're trying to have a long-term relationship with a client, with a customer, with a supplier, with your employees, you're trying to motivate people, you're trying to inspire people, well, you really aren't going to get those kind of long-term results if you antagonize folks. So we believe that collectively the skills that we teach in our workshop do help you strengthen relationships and build trust. And just to go a little deeper into to build on that, I'm going to turn it back to Paul.
Great, thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
So when we look at successful influencers, I mean, there's a few different ways that they really are set apart. We break it down into 3 areas: influence behaviors, influence strategy and planning, and principled. And if we look at those further, so influencing behaviors, they use a variety of different approaches. And I think it's important that you think in terms of the way you interact with people. Sometimes you try different approaches, and if you got somebody who's difficult, that's not working with you, and you don't give up on them, you find different ways to get through to them. They vary the behavior to fit the situation and the person. And I think one of the most critical things that often is missed when it comes to trying to create influence or get, like say you've got an idea you want to work through up to management and you're finding resistance, set a clear goal. Set clear goals for all situations, and then create a plan of importance and influence around those situations. And it can be a game changer because it helps you actually kind of map out what your areas of concern and frustration are. And then focus on those goals and focus on the relationships themselves. You may be trying to get something for yourself, but if you focus on the other person and make it more about them and less about you, it can be extremely empowering. And then find ways to use positive forms of influence. Bill talked about the negative forms of influence. We're going to talk about that a little bit further because at the end of the day, there are, okay, bear with me here, a little lag here. So there are 4 positive influential approaches. And then one we're going to identify as negative. We're going to talk about all 5 of those, excuse me. So when we think about persuading, people use this approach, and this is where you might want to take some notes, but they explain suggestions and decisions based on facts and logic. So people that do persuading often come in armed with a lot of knowledge about the situation. They're forceful and persuasive in making recommendations. They state opinions concisely and logically. And they act as an expert or influencer to others. And finally, they use data and evidence to support their position. So persuasion requires really having some knowledge, and it requires you to come in being ready to talk about your position and arming with some facts. So involving, these are people that they get other people involved in the decision-making and problem-solving process. And we've seen this a lot. You know, it's like they find their colleagues, they align with their colleagues and get their colleagues on the same page with them. They listen to other points of view, even if they don't agree. And this is an area where, I mean, throughout my career, I've often struggled with this because I get fixated on here's what I want and here's why I want it, and then I don't always listen to the other point of view. But I've learned over time and through my life that that's not the way to get things done. So if you want to be influential, you have to be open-minded. So let's take suggestions and ideas from others. So getting other people to almost come in and align with you as a teammate and express this from an area of genuine concern and feelings of others. So making sure you exercise maybe even a little empathy. Ask questions to clarify misunderstandings and to gather missing information. So if you're trying to approach from an involving perspective, you want to get other people on the same page with you, but you also want to make sure that your any misunderstandings are addressed. So aligning, people use this approach, they acknowledge shared values and common goals. Obviously, you want to get in alignment with somebody. So we're on the same page. We have the same goals. We're both after the same thing. Discuss ideas with enthusiasm, passion, and excitement. So if you're exercising alignment, it's about believing what you're going after and being passionate and excited about it and get others on the same page with you. You know, if you get those other people to feel like they're in the same, we're in this together mindset, it can be extremely empowering. And they describe a common vision and focus on mutual benefits, so creating win-win scenarios. And then finally, they create an environment for working together and collaborating. Because if you're in alignment, it's about being on the same page, but it's also about finding ways that it does create a win-win scenario. And exchanging, this is a situation where people often give rewards and support to those who cooperate. You know what? If you help me out on this, I'm willing to work a few extra hours for you. Or if you're willing to help me get this passed through, I'll take on that report process you have to get done. So you find ways to actually reward them and offer something in exchange. They provide a quid pro quo for resources, information, and other items of value. They readily offer incentives and benefits to others, and they state clearly their needs or wants. So you have to go in an exchange situation, knowing what you want, expressing it, and then being willing to offer something in exchange. So they work for win-win solutions that are beneficial to both parties so that, you know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But the one area that Bill mentioned negative, and on the polling question, I was kind of surprised to see so many people responding that the negative side was what we might be talking about influence. Coercion, we've all seen this in really aggressive managers. We've seen this in bosses who think that bullying their staff is the way to get things done. You know, they exert time or deadline pressure on people. They refuse to make any concessions or change opinions and positions. It's more about what they want and less about what others want. They threaten to take retaliatory action if the other person doesn't comply. Look, if you don't like it, you can leave. That's a coercive tactic. They make demands without providing rationale. And then, quite frankly, they rely primarily on authority and positional power. Now, I mentioned earlier successful CEOs and politicians. There is definitely an element of coercion that actually exists in both those areas. But the people that I think are the most influential and the ones that I would want to follow are the people that I see as leaders. And they focus on getting things done, but they focus on doing it in a way that isn't coercive, it isn't aggressive towards the other people. So Bill, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. There's a direct link between the slide you're seeing now and the prior slide that Paul showed you with the 4 positive approaches to influence and then the 1 negative one, coercing. And again, many of you may be here just to kind of listen to what we're saying. Certainly if you're taking some notes because you want to try to remember some of the key points. This slide here is a really important slide, and it links to what Paul just said. If I like to use the word you to mean you, the influencer. So if you're trying to influence somebody, whoever it is, internally, maybe a senior manager, maybe a peer or a colleague, or externally, a customer or supplier or whatever, if you're trying to influence somebody, in addition to using the positive approaches that Paul said on the prior slide, persuading or involving or aligning or exchanging, the other thing that you need to be conscious of is, how's the conversation going? What's the effect or the outcome? And what you see on this slide, and this is why I think this is a very important slide, is the best case is what you see on the upper left on the diagram. It's commitment. And the word I would add if you are taking notes is the simplest way that I would in the workshop define commitment is, do you really have buy-in from the other person or from the group? And the best case is to get buy-in. And if you look at the upper right, the worst case is you get resistance. Now, I'm going to talk more about resistance in a moment, so I'm not skipping it. Just bear with me for a second. And then sometimes you're in between. You don't get outright resistance, but you also don't get a lot of buy-in. You get what we would call compliance. The other person is going to do it partially or do it half-heartedly, but they're at least doing it. And what's a little difficult in a session today is because we don't have a chance to do role plays. But in a live workshop, we do a lot of practice activities so that you can see precisely for what situations will persuading help you get commitment, for what situations will involving help you get commitment, or will aligning help you build commitment, or will exchanging help you build commitment. And one of the things that we love about the course is, since you're influencing so many different people, you can't just rely on one influence approach in order to get commitment. So best case is commitment, worst case is resistance. Now let me stay with resistance. I said I didn't want to skip over that. When we ask people who've completed our workshop, what's one of the most important takeaways that you learn from going through the whole course? One of the most common answers we get is, it really helped me a lot to learn how to overcome resistance. Now, you as an influencer should not be surprised if you encounter resistance. So because resistance is such because learning how to overcome resistance is such an important thing, this was the topic that Paul and I mutually thought we would spend the most time on as a single topic today. So I'd like to go to now our second. We have two polling questions. I'd like to go to a second polling question, and this polling question has to do with, it's basically based on this. If you, let me just show it here. If you watch, okay. So even though I talked about resistance, I want to talk about some other things. I'd like you to say, what do you find most challenging when you try to influence people? I'd like to do the same thing as we did before. Please take a few seconds to vote on these 4 choices. Okay, looks like we've almost all voted. Give me another 5-10 seconds. Okay, let me close and show the results. Now, if I can make a little joke with you, as I know you're just in listening mode, I don't want this to sound like a game show, but the number one answer, we actually asked this question also very early in our workshop. What do you find most challenging in terms of influencing others? And the number one answer is resistance. And you can see the percentage that almost close to 60% of you chose that one. But the other 2 choices are the other 2 most popular choices that we hear. So if you chose influencing upward, you're in good company. Influencing upward is the phrase we use to mean to influencing more senior people, and certainly influencing a team. That's become increasingly a popular choice because more and more so we work on teams, and then all of the above. So what I'd like to do is in the full workshop we would actually cover all three things you see there. We have a teaching module on how to overcome resistance. We have another one on how to influence upward, and another one on how to influence in teams. And what I'd like to spend the most time on for today is I'd like to go a little more deeply into the resistance one, because that is cited as the number one answer or challenge. So if I can, again, for staying in terms of, so let me go to the next slide and we'll go a little bit deeper on resistance. So you as the influencer should not be surprised by resistance. I'm now going to drill down a little deeper on just that one item. Here's now, again, another question we ask in our workshop. And I think about this, and then in a minute or two, we're going to open this to questions from you guys. But think about this. Why do people resist? If you're trying to influence somebody, you've got a great idea or a suggestion or whatever, and you get resistance, why do people resist? And I wish I could limit it to one thing, but the honest answer is, and in our workshop we often see 15 or 20 things listed as to why people resist. But if you wanted to write this down, this would be the three things at the bottom of this slide would be something I would encourage you to make a note of, because these are repeatedly cited as the three most frequent reasons why people resist. Number one, they don't want to change, or to say it a little differently, resistance to change. Number two, people are just too busy. I mean, who isn't too busy today? And then number three, the other person doesn't perceive any benefit, or you see the acronym WIIFM, that's just the shorthand for what's in it for me. But resistance to change, being too busy, not perceiving any benefit or WIFM, these are reasons why people have difficulty in terms of overcoming resistance. So I'd love you to cite these as, just note these. Now, in the workshop, we would open it up to brainstorm and actually get suggestions from the class on, okay, how do you overcome resistance? What do you do if it's resistance to change or too busy? But to tie it to what Paul said a few minutes ago, you basically can use all of those positive influence approaches to help people to change. Let me just give a quick example, then in a minute we'll open it up to questions and answers from you guys. For example, if it was resistance to change, maybe I would use the approach of persuading and try to highlight the benefits to the person for the change or the reasons for the change. Or maybe I would use involving, and I would ask some questions to find out more precisely, hey, what is it about the change that bothers you? Or maybe I would do, to the third approach that Paul talked about, aligning. Maybe another way to successfully overcome resistance to change is to highlight to the other person, hey, we do share some common goals. We might disagree on the way to get there, but we do agree that it is to our mutual benefit to improve client retention or to reduce cost or something along those lines. So there's a very direct connection between the influence approaches in the model that Paul showed earlier, and then learning how you can apply those behaviors and become more skillful and comfortable at overcoming resistance to, whether it's resistance to change, or I'm too busy, or I don't see any benefits. Now, just one last slide, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. The module in the course on handling conflict and resistance is very popular. Like I said, you can use a variety of influence skills to minimize and overcome resistance, but I don't want to say this to discourage you. Sometimes you're just dealing with a very difficult person, and again, if I can make a little joke with you, I believe very positively all the skills in the workshop will teach you how to minimize and respond to resistance with almost everybody. But there are some people that no matter what you do, it's almost like you can't win the conversation. So Paul, what I'd like to do is just open it to questions and answers and see if you want to say any additional things before we move on to the more presentation.
No, I mean, I think that's great. And I mean, resistance, from when I sat through this course the first time, and resistance was one of the things that really stood out as an area where there's such opportunity to grow. And we're going to talk about results in a little bit. You already talked about commitment being the ultimate end goal, but when you're running into resistance, it doesn't mean that that's the end. There's ways to come back and get other people involved in that process. Bill, we do have one question that came through. It says, what if you personally can't overcome resistance? How do you respond to that?
Well, if you let me answer that, and then I saw another question that came in as well. So let me answer that first question. If you personally, first of all, we believe that after going through the influence course, you'll learn a variety of ways to overcome resistance. So you'll find that you become more and more successful at it. But to take the question literally, if you find that in spite of everything you've tried, you can't overcome resistance, one of the things we'll talk about in the class is what we call indirect influence. And what that means in plain English is perhaps there's somebody else, a colleague or a manager or whoever. Maybe you can enlist the help of a colleague or someone else in your company or organization and see if they can intervene on your behalf and overcome the resistance. I see a second question came in on what is WIFM, what's that acronym WIFM, and I might have said it too quickly verbally, but it literally stands, we did not invent the I just didn't put down the abbreviation WIIFM. It just stands for what's in it for me. In other words, if I'm trying to influence somebody else and the other person doesn't think there's a WIFM, they don't think there's anything in it for them, then that's another reason that we sometimes will get resistance. Okay, Paul, anything else? Do you see anything else here?
Yeah, there's another question. What if a more senior person or higher level person resists? So obviously there's several things you can do there, but I think you can talk about consequences, so that it's you want to avoid a you versus him or her situation. But if you can align with them and work with them to solve the problem together and find a way to create a win-win scenario, I think that's an excellent way to address that challenge. Anything to add to that,
Yep.
Bill?
No, I think that's spot on, Paul. So.
Great.
Okay, for sake of time, I know we're trying to also honor the time commitment for everybody. I think we're going to open it up to more questions at the end, but how about if we continue on? Is that good?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Okay, one of the things that is used in the influence course is a pre-work assessment survey, and this is designed to kind of get a litmus test for where you stand before, and then a look at where you see yourself afterwards. So it's identifying, everyone's natural influential strengths, but then finding areas that you really could integrate into your own, that might be contrary to what your natural instincts. Successful influencers use all positive influence approaches and behaviors. It's not about using one. I mean, obviously, sometimes we get fixated on one way of dealing with things, but leveraging multiple approaches can be such a key way to make a difference. And so using this pre-assessment survey gives you an idea of, here's the areas that I'm naturally inclined to go to. These are areas that are difficult for me, and then it gives you something to work on. You can examine the peaks and valleys. It allows you to see where you have biggest areas of improvement, and then you can look at, on a question-by-question basis, you can look at how, if you made some differences in your approach, it would impact how influential you can be and how much change you can drive. Okay. Bill, can you advance that slide? I'm seeing a lag on this end.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about it being about results. There's a gentleman by the name of Gary Ryan Blair. He's a time management expert. He has a program called the 100-Day Challenge. In his concept, results are everything. It's not about the tasks. It's not about the little things you need to get done. It's about the end result. So knowing what you want and then focusing on getting those results. And as we stated, the three ultimately outcomes are commitment, compliance, or resistance. If you're running into resistance and that's not the ultimate result you want, you might have to go back to the drawing board. Find others to align with. Find ways to influence indirectly and work on getting the results you want. As Peter Drucker said, leadership is defined by results. Okay, Bill, go ahead and advance.
Sure. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah. Okay, so it starts with setting a clear goal. If you don't know what your goal or your outcome is, it's really hard to get there. You might have in your mind what you want to accomplish, but if you really come up with a clear goal, and goals are defined by a clear set of objectives and a time stamp around it. So, I want to be able to get this report processed by next week, but that means I need to get some support. And how am I going to do that? So setting a clear goal and doing some situational analysis and saying, okay, here's what I need to accomplish to reach that goal, and then focusing on getting the right people involved in that process. Bill, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Sure. Okay. Just to this slide here, Paul talked about box number 1, situational analysis, setting a clear goal. One of the other popular parts of the Influence Workshop is a planning process we teach. And whether you have the time, many times we don't have a lot of time to plan. But and if I was limited on time, what Paul said is exactly the most important thing to do. If you go into a meeting or a conversation and have a clear goal, you're already going to set yourself apart from many people who just try to wing it. But if you do have time, and I'm saying this for those of you that are leaders and are trying to improve the ability of your people to become better at influence, for those of you that are individual contributors, whether you're in sales or whatever your job is, if you have like an important sales call coming up or an important meeting coming up, one of the things we talk about in the workshop is a 5-step planning process. We actually have a planning form that gives you some precise questions to ask for these 5 steps. So Paul's already talked about step 1, and if you just have a little more time, our planning form was designed so that it only takes about 10 minutes in total to fill the whole form out. Let me talk about the other 4 steps, and this would give you a really a plan that would highlight the key factors that are going to make you more likely to be successful. So the second step is, once I know my goal, and these are linked, once I know my goal, which influence behaviors and approaches are most relevant to that goal? We have a checklist that allows you to do that in only a matter of minutes, a couple minutes. After you've done step 2, let me go a little deeper on where it says point number 3. Plan your sequence of influence behaviors. What that means in plain English is, what are you going to say first? How do you want to start out the meeting or conversation? We do not believe that you should ever try to plan or script the entire meeting, but I hope you agree with this. And again, we're going to open it up to questions again in a few minutes. But one of the things we believe will make you more successful is plan your opening remarks. That's within your control. And then if you get off to a good start, to say it a little differently, if you get off to a good start, then you're much more likely that the rest of the meeting or conversation is going to go well. Now, steps 1, 2, and 3 are the core part of the planning process. Look at step 4 and 5. If I am influencing upward, and I'll show you a slide on that in a moment, if I am influencing upward, you may have to make some modifications to your plan. And then the final step in the planning process, step 5, is responding to resistance. And that's when you would bring in some of the tips and advice that we said earlier from today's webinar. So let me just go to this is our final teaching slide, and then I'm going to turn it back to Paul. But let me go a little deeper so I can explain what we mean by modifying your plan if you're influencing upward. Influencing upward has become a very popular topic. We use that to mean influencing anyone that's more senior than you. This could be somebody in your company, or it could be somebody outside your company. And 3 pieces of advice. You see them on the center of the screen. If I'm trying to influence somebody that's more senior, One of the things we recommend you do is what we call organizational consequences. I don't like to use a lot of jargon, but let me define that one. Organizational consequences basically means business reasons. Hey, here's my recommendation. I recommend we adopt some new software for our company. I recommend that we put together a different organization in terms of how the sales team is aligned. And my reasons for saying this is I think the business reasons could be client retention, reducing cost, increasing market share, improving morale. But if you're influencing upward, you need to have what are your one or two strongest business reasons. Second piece of advice is actually something we said in response to one of your questions earlier today. Indirect influence. Let me assume that I'm a more junior level person and I'm influencing at a higher level in the organization. Maybe in some cases I have to get a senior level person to be the messenger because peer-to-peer they'll be more successful than me trying to influence upward. Now that's not always the case, but it's a good contingency plan. And then my final piece of advice is be concise. When you guys have probably read studies on this, but there's lots of communication studies, leadership books and studies that basically say that if you're trying to influence a senior level person, they make up their minds really quickly. So be concise, and basically that would mean just list one or two key reasons, get to the heart of your argument, don't beat around the bush. So let me turn it back to Paul, and then like I said, we're going to also open it up to more questions as we get going here. Paul?
Great. Yeah, go ahead and advance that slide. I seem to have lost the ability to do that, Bill.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah,
so here's my direct contact information and Bill's email address on there. We want to make sure that if you have anything that you want to discuss further related to this, that you can. We want to definitely open it up to questions. And one thing I will tell you is that when I first saw this course and I said I want to do a webinar on this, I think it's a great opportunity. Bill was like, how are we going to pack 2 days worth of content into one hour? And it's not possible. So we wanted to go further. We focused a lot on resistance today. There's more related to that topic as well, but there's so much more that we can do. But the whole goal here was to give you guys a taste of how you can be more influential and how you can make a difference in your own career. Bill, let's see if you can advance that slide again.
Sure. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so now what's next? We want to provide you the opportunity to go through this same course that's taught in a 2-day, fully immersive workshop. Weeks of training. It's going to take place live, but they'll also be recorded, so you'll have access to the course. There's going to be weekly accountability and support calls. So you'll have a live Q&A, live training, and then a live Q&A, and this will be recorded, so you'll have access to that content, so that as you move forward, you'll be able to refer to it, and if you miss a session, you'll be able to actually have access to it. We believe that teaching this live is the way to make this as closely representative to the workshop that Bill teaches. So the cost of doing this, this is a course that costs thousands of dollars for people to attend. Corporations send their key staff to these sessions. So we want to make it affordable. We want to make it cost effective and make it so that it's valuable to everyone. So one-time payment of $199. The training calls, they're going to be starting in February, on the 9th of February, and the live Q&A calls will start on February 13th. So if you want to register, I'm going to give you the opportunity to register now, and we're going to open this up to Q&A. But if you want to register, go to activesales.com/influenceregistration.php.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bill, let's open it up to Q&A, and then we can come back and talk a little bit more about the course. But I see another question that came in, and I think this is one that you have to answer just because of your experience teaching this so many years. What about cross-cultural influence?
That's an excellent question.
They're talking about different cultures, different countries.
Yeah, that's true. It's a bit limiting with so many people on the line, and we can't clarify the question. But we actually, that comes up a lot in the workshop. It comes up in some cases because a particular company or individual, to do his or her job, is actually interacting with people in different countries around the world. I'll make this brief, but in my 20-plus years of teaching this course, I've actually taught this in so many countries around the world, I've lost track. And what I have noticed is, and this is my way to answer, part one of my answer to that question is, the core model is the same. We hear the same concerns and issues all over the world. The obvious difference are things like body language and some languaging things. Like, let me give an example. Paul earlier today said that one of the approaches to influence is involving. Well, in America, involving in plain English is asking questions. Well, in some countries and cultures, they're pretty direct with their questions, and they don't mind asking them even in a public setting. But in other countries and cultures, their questions are a little more roundabout, and they would never ever raise a question or challenge you in a team setting. They would be just uncomfortable doing that. So there are cultural differences, but we've certainly learned that the core concepts in model does apply. And the other thing I would say about the cross-cultural question is that this is why not knowing exactly what you mean, the person who asked that also applies in terms of influencing within the same country. I'm hoped you'd agree with this, but I've lived and worked throughout the United States, and I hate to make generalizations, but I can make one quick generalization. Influencing somebody in New York City is a whole lot different than maybe influencing somebody in Atlanta or California in terms of just culture and pace and those types of things. Paul, I see another question's come in. I'd be glad to have you answer this, or I'd be glad to answer it. But it says, how do you build trust if you've gotten off on a bad footing with somebody? So just how do you build trust if you've gotten off on a bad footing with somebody?
I think we can tackle that from a couple of different angles. I've had this happen in my own life, and when you feel like you've lost that trust, and somebody's lost trust in you, or they see that you've gotten off on the wrong foot, and they're resistant to talking to you, you need to find ways to win them back over, and that can be done by aligning yourself with maybe another associate or colleague if you're talking about on a professional level. I mean, this applies also to personally. It's like maybe you bring another friend into the conversation and you focus on, it's like, what can I do to win them back over? Because sometimes we get wrapped up in our own limitations, and we focus so much on what's holding us back in those situations, and we continue beating our head against the wall, going, well, why aren't they, it's like, well, they're never going to change. They're never going to change. Maybe you're the one who needs to change your approach, and that's why there are multiple ways to influence. And so finding a way of earning their trust, and maybe that's if it's a situation where they feel that you're just asking something from them for yourself and there's nothing in it for them, maybe you come back with another strategy where you offer them something and say, look, I know that maybe we got off on the wrong foot, and you think that I'm just in this for selfish reasons. Let me offer you something to make this so that you see value in it. And then you offer to help them in some way that they might benefit. Bill, what else do you have to add to that?
Yeah, well, I don't want to be redundant. I was going to say that certainly selecting the right influence approach, and so you kind of supports a lot of what you've already said. The only other thing I was going to say, and I think your comments really came close to, or touched close to this, Paul, is it takes time to rebuild trust. And I know we didn't emphasize that during today's webinar, but we're not trying to get the point across that one magic conversation or one single phrase is suddenly going to make everything succeed. Many times, and we will talk about in the workshop that a series of meetings or conversations is quite often needed to help you reach your goal. And if building or rebuilding trust was the issue, I would certainly expect that it would take more than one conversation.
And I think that's a key point, Bill, because when we think about influence and sometimes we do run into resistance, the one thing that the course does really emphasize, I'd say one of the things it does more than anything, it empowers you to see that there are other ways. And so sometimes you're not getting what you want, and normally you would just walk away from it or give up. Or more normally you might get angry and feel it's like, okay, why aren't they, I mean, this is ridiculous the way they're treating me. I can't believe they won't work with me. Going through this course, what it taught me is that, you know what, there are always other ways, and it does take multiple steps sometimes to accomplish it, but it empowers you because now you have a roadmap. You have tools that you can fall back on. You know, if you're somebody that focuses very much on an aligning type of relationship where, you know, you focus very much on common shared goals and values, and you're really passionate about your idea, well, that passion sometimes can be seen as, it's like, yeah, I know you're really excited about this, but, you know, quite frankly, I'm not on the same page with you. It forces you to say, okay, you know what, maybe I need to step back and find a different approach, and maybe I come back and focus on an exchange where I'm going to do something for you, or I find a way to be more persuasive. So this gives you total empowerment in these situations which might otherwise seem very bleak.
Mm-hmm. It's good. Let me, I see two more questions are coming in. I see two that are linked. If I can, let me read these out loud, and I'll read the first one, give an answer, and then give us, I think it links to the second one, so then I'll see, Paul, if you want to add to this as well. But here's the question. Which of the positive influence approaches is most effective for coalition building when pitching senior level decision makers? My answer is going to tie back to what Paul showed earlier when he showed the 4 positive approaches to influence. When I'm dealing with senior level decision makers, and you recall I said that one of the tips is be concise, since I know I'm not going to have a lot of time, I need to have done my homework first. So I don't use involving. I don't use a lot or any involving when I'm trying to pitch senior level decision makers. I try to have gotten the necessary information before the meeting. But in terms of building a coalition, getting their commitment, and being successful when influencing senior level decision makers, the 2 influence approaches that I find work well together are aligning and persuading. But again, being concise. Aligning would be making sure you highlight the common goals that you have, and then giving the 1 or 2 really strong reasons, I find goes very well. And if I can leverage this to the second question, and then Paul, see if you want to add on one or both. The second related question is, when attempting to influence somebody higher up the internal structure, how do you not overstep your boundaries as a subordinate? So how do you not overstep your boundaries as a subordinate if you're trying to influence somebody higher up? Similar comment, just like influencing higher level decision makers. I believe since you don't have to give them a lot of personal reasons isn't necessarily going to work, but I would highlight those business reasons, and again try to highlight the business goals. So it's not really a case of you, the lower level subordinate, are trying to say something or do something, but you're connecting your recommendation to goals that they themselves have set. So Paul, I'd love to see any additional thoughts, and then we'll see if any more questions.
Yeah, I do, and it's your first point is amazing, because I think we've all been in those situations where we've seen that situation where somebody has a bunch of people on board. Hey, we all want to get this done. We all want to get this done, and that person goes to fight to get that done. And when they turn around, all those people that were standing there supporting them in the idea stage step away and are nowhere to be seen during the time when you're actually trying to get this accomplished. And sometimes that person feels like they have egg on their face, or they feel like they are, that their coworkers, quite frankly, stab them in the back. It's like, well, how could you do that to me? How could you make me look that way? We've all seen that happen, and maybe we've even experienced it ourselves. But this is where it really does come back to having a clear goal and strategy, and making sure that you do have others aligned with you. And it puts you in a really powerful position if you're not standing alone. Now, one of the things that Bill talked about was influencing up when, how do you not overstep your bounds? That can be tricky, especially if you have a manager who is resistant to working with you. So you need to find ways to, quite frankly, win that manager over, win that person over that might be a roadblock, because there are times that you cannot overstep them without putting yourself in a position where, quite frankly, you might have egg on your face, you might lose your job. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't address it and shouldn't focus on that initiative. You just need to find ways to get them aligned with you and help them see. And if there's that much resistance, maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and redefine your goal and strategy. Because maybe the end goal, like I said, it's about outcomes. Unfortunately, we sometimes get very fixated on the tasks. We get very fixated on the little minute details. If it's about the outcome, there's a lot of different ways to get there, so go back to the drawing board.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, there's one other question here. I love this question. Can I use these skills at home? Bill mentioned doing business with somebody in New York being different than maybe doing some business with somebody in Atlanta. Well, I was born in the Midwest. I grew up in Nebraska, and I'm married to a woman who was born and grew up on the East Coast. And there's definitely a difference in approach. I can't say I'm the most soft-spoken person in the world, but sometimes it requires me finding ways to work on influence. So yes, this stuff works at home, very much so. You just need to find different ways to implement it. And I think that's the key thing here is this is going to be something you can apply to your life, not just in business.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, Paul, if you could teach people how to do this at work and at home, we could probably raise the price.
Hey, we made an agreement here. We wanted to make it so that it was appealing to everyone. So,
right. Yeah.
So, Bill, any other questions?
No, I think we're good, yeah. And we want to honor the time commitment. So, do you want to have any concluding remarks, Paul?
I just want to say I want to thank you all for coming. I mean, I've been excited about this for a long time because I see the potential. It took me some work on influencing Bill to get him to agree to let me teach this course outside of his traditional 2-day workshop. The 2-day workshop is amazingly powerful because it's in person, but we've come up with some creative ways to make this so that doing this virtually, it'll be equally effective. But to do it right, we can't do it in 1-hour session. We can't do it in one or two phone calls. So we are going to do this over a 6-week period, but the course will be recorded for anybody who decides to sign up. We're going to start the first one on Monday at 3 o'clock Central Time. That's 4 o'clock Eastern, and that's going to start on February 9th. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go out to activesales.com /influence registration.php. Sign up. I'd love to have you be a part of this. I'm excited about this content. The full course is going to knock your socks off. I mean, hopefully you took some great things away today. But influence is something that can be taught. You can better yourself. You can be somebody who makes a bigger impact than you ever dreamt possible by learning strategies beyond what maybe you've been focusing on throughout your career to this point. We wanted to keep this to an hour because we want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we're here wrapping it up right on the hour. I want to say thank you so much for coming today, and Bill, thank you for your time and for your generosity and donating time and energy to this. And I hope some people out there see the value in this and decide to sign up because it's such great content. So once again, activesales.com /influence registration.php. Thank you all for attending, and have a great day.